And with that, I'm going to read a poem from my yet to be published 5th collection of poetry called Walking in Fog. That time of year has come again when one morning you awaken to a world shrouded in mist. The clouds of heaven come down to filter out the background noise. You look outside, noon dimmer than twilight. Street lights still on to say, you need us now. We will stay as long as the sun is covered. Down the sidewalk, wet with dew, your neighbor fades to gray and then to nothing. You know she's going somewhere familiar, some everyday place you also know, and yet in the swirling cloud of a winter day, not every path is fully visible. You think of your aging father who called last night to talk and got lost in the mists of memory, wandering down streets and alleys and roads no longer used, no lamplights left to guide him down paths he once knew, the way no longer visible. So when I'm published, I'll let you all know, and you'll have a chance to jump on board and enjoy that. Our next person up is Joan, Leotta. Give me 1 second here to set my timer.
Unmute. There we go.
And go.
Hi, I'm Joan Leotta, and my new book is Feathers on Stone, and it's published by Main Street Rag. The poem I'm going to read you is an ekphrastic, but it's an easy ekphrastic to follow, even if you've never seen it or don't really know, because it's after a Rothko painting, essentially a block of orange and a block of red. So easy enough to visualize it. So, and this is after one that's hanging in the Phillips Gallery. And I was one of those people who always took my children everywhere. So this is about taking my daughter to see the Rothko for the first time, and other things, of course, at the Phillips. One might think Rothko, with his many studies of orange, orange red, and orange with ochre, was an August baby, August being the Northern Hemisphere's most sun-filled month. In August, air itself is heated to the point of flame, doused in the South by a hearty helping of humidity. I believe he fell in love with August and painted its intense warmth over and over, as fascinated with the sun's heat as Monet was with sun's light and shadow. Rothko shaped August's uncontrollable heat into rectangles, pools of warmth, boundaried spaces, so we can safely dip our minds into them, claiming a searing sort of respite, finding an impetus to creativity in the endless heat bearing down on us. One summer afternoon, when my daughter was 3, we ambled about the air-conditioned galleries of the Corcoran and Phillips museums. Jenny was indifferent to much in the modern rooms, but she pointed to an orange-red Rothko and announced, "Heat." So began my obsession with Rothko. After all, who better would know heat than a child born on a 103-degree Fahrenheit day in August? And that's the poem. Thank
Very
you.
good. Let me also mention here, I need you to put a link in the chat to where your book can be found and purchased.
Oh, yes, I forgot. I'll do
And since mine isn't published yet, I can't do that, but we'll have fun with it later. And be as nice to me as you can, because I hate having to dig through and sort through the chat and then go find a link and find out that it links to something else. Give me the best link you can straight to your books as you read. Next up is Yvonne.
Hi all, I'm Yvonne Zipter. My latest book is, can't tell if it's showing up because I'm in a little corner here, but is The Wordless Lullaby of Crickets from Kelsey Press.
Oh, yes.
Just one interesting tidbit about the cover. I had asked a friend of mine who's an artist if she could create a cover for me, and she actually created several, but this seemed the most appropriate. It kind of depicts a lot of the things in the title poem. So I'm very lucky to know an artist who's that flexible. I'm going to read the last poem in the collection. It's called Hum. For longer than memory, we thought giraffes silent. Their 13-foot windpipes too great a climb for the air pushed from the bellows of their lungs to quiver the cords of their voice boxes. The truth is, they hum under cover of night. And given the long tube of their tracheas, I imagined they sound like didgeridoos. And it seems that's so, low and throbbing, a lullaby for a gangly baby. Though in fact, we don't yet know why they hum. Perhaps it's merely for the pleasure of it, like my wife, who can barely breathe without also singing. Did she always sing like this? I queried my mother-in-law. Yes, she said. She hummed constantly. It drove me crazy. But I like the way the song waves move through her, use her, as if she were the soundtrack to her own life, a movie made for joy. Of course, it's possible giraffes simply convey giraffish data with their rumbling vibrations. But I prefer to believe they're humming from a sense of safety, knowing they can let their guard down, that they're among their own kind, humming through the dark hours on a swell of happiness.
Good.
Thank you.
Great. It looks like Evie is up next.
Thank you. I'm Evie Groch. I live in El Cerrito, California, and have been in education all my life, including in retirement. My book is called Half the Hurricanes, cover also decorated by an artist friend of mine. And the reason for the title is, for so many years, all hurricanes were named for women. They got the blame for all of them. But lately, we only get the blame for half, because now they alternate with men's names, hence half the hurricanes. Having done poetry and some artwork, at one point I signed up for a watercolor class at a studio near me. And this is what I realized while taking a watercolor class there, where I have to give up some control, because watercolor has its own way. It's called In the Cupboard. On the table, among the new gamboge, Windsor lemon and permanent rose, lie brushes pointed and rounded, near water cups of Prussian blue and jasper green. We paint with broad strokes and detailed attention the broccoli heads and tangelos slinking across the model's table. We remember to color wash and define by negative space. We focus on the table and suffer no distractions until the teacher opens the cupboard to reach the empty yogurt containers, and I espy a pair of red and white stilettos. Stilettos with 4-inch heels, which rest perpendicularly on the shelf and whisper for someone to set them free, take them out, and dance hard. I cannot shift my eyes. Broccoli can wait. Who left the shoes? In a cupboard of discards, which patiently wait their turn to prance and spin, they plead for mercy and move me like no tangelo can. Thank you.
Good. Thank you. Next up, Charles.
Okay, I'm going to try to do screen share. I'm Charles Perrone. I live in Santa Cruz, otherwise known as Santa Cruz, where the boardwalk is. So
Was.
yeah, well, yeah, they've kind of restored it. And we've had a few storms lately. And so we have about 20,000 people out in the valley here who are in need, displaced. So let me find screen share. Okay, so I'm here to promote not myself, but a book I translated. And share. There it is. So this is the complete poems of Paulo Leminski, who's of Polish descent, but is from Brazil. Book was published in 2013. It was a bestseller in Brazil. It sold 200,000 copies, which is an absolute miracle. If we sell 200, we think that's heaven. 200,000 and still selling. Very rare achievement. So this is our careful translation of the Portuguese original. The author was a creative writer, a translator, an educator, an ad man, and martial arts master. He translated from 13 different languages. All these endeavors appear in his multifaceted poetry of contrast, rigor versus emotion, erudition versus lightness, avant-garde versus convention, formal construction, colloquialism, west, east, cultured, pop, super concentrated and quotidian, the existential, the love lyric, a lot of haiku, a lot of visual effects, some joke poems, metapoetic slogans. It's all good. So there's something for everybody there. And it's a true adventure for the intellect in the senses. And William Allegrezza, who runs Moria Poetry there in Chicago, wrote a review on, I forget the name of the site, but anyway, I quoted from his review saying, reading the work of Paulo will rearrange your internal shelf of great poets. He teaches English and creative writing at Northern Indiana University. And like everybody else, this book is at Amazon, so it's pretty easy. You just you navigate to Amazon and punch in all poetry or Leminski and you'll get it. Let me stop share here. Let's say there's a paperback, which is less than $20, which is the price of a drink in a bar in San Francisco. And there's a hardback, which is, I guess, for libraries, because people don't tend to buy those. And so since we were talking about being 70 years old and having diseases and all, I also announced this week that Carnival Press in UK published an anthology called Disease. And it's all poems and visual works about maladies. But going back to the being 70, Paulo Leminski imagined this. He died at the age of 45, so he's looking forward about 25 years and imagining 70. And he said, when I make it to 70, this adolescence will be ended. I'll give up this crazy life and be a tenured faculty member. I'll do whatever my father wants to begin life with perfect pitch. I'll do what my mother wishes and seize every opportunity to become a pillar of society and scratch my law school itch. Then see everything insane conscious at the end of this adolescence. So there's a lot of playful stuff in there too, and there's a lot of what I call meta poems where he talks about Homer, Latin poetry, the old French masters, Pound, it goes everywhere. So it's this kind of crazy mix between very educated, almost, he's not a university guy, but very educated. He grew up speaking Latin, and crazy kid, adolescent who doesn't really care much what the elders think. A fine balance, and there's a middle section which is like visual poems with visual effects, fonts and things like that. So anyway, it's pretty easy to find. Amazon.com, all poetry by Paulo Leminski. And while you're there, you can also see the book that I presented at this event, I guess last year, maybe 2 years ago, my own is called Designs.
Right.
And also at Amazon. Thank you all.
While you're on Amazon, if you would copy and paste that URL into the chat, I would very much appreciate it.
Okay, let me go find it.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
Geetha, let's hear from you before you fall asleep.
Thank you. Thank you. Love being here. Actually, I know 3 languages. We speak, read, and write in 3 languages, but I write poetry in English. How that happened is, I wouldn't be able to explain, but that's how it's been. So the book I have published is called Arjavam. This is the book, Arjavam. Arjavam is a Sanskrit word, and I'll just explain it very briefly. Arjavam means being straightforward. It is which I have also explained in the beginning of the book. Arjavam, the dictionary meaning of this Sanskrit word is straightforward, open-hearted, simple. I first heard this word from a wise master who elaborated that there should be a consonance in what the heart feels, the mind thinks, and words express. Much like how there's no place for a false note in a piece of music. So this is what the book, the meaning of the book is. And I'd like to read a poem from the book, which is called Father's Funeral. Now, in our tradition, when a person is cremated, the ashes are carried in a pot, in an earthen pot, and that pot is actually thrown into any water body, normally a sea or a river. So this is about that. It starts from there. The poem is Father's Funeral. As the pot was struck and the ashes strewn, the waves frolicked and the frothing ocean welcomed the end of another earth-born, bone-weary being. The sun shone unconcerned and the burning sand scalded our bare souls. The horizon rolled away, sunk into the blue beyond. It wrenched our hearts to say goodbye, but it seemed that morning was banished on the beach. As waves lapped our feet and the wind blew our faces dry, right there beside us, fluttering on fragile wings, was a startling golden butterfly. That's my poem.
Excellent, thank you.
Thank you.
And you will put a link in the chat so
Yes,
we can find
yes.
that.
Yes, it's on Amazon.
Thank you. Great.
Thank you. Thank you.
Next up is Debra.
Hi, I'm Debra Kaufman. I'm pasting my link in there now. My collection is called God Shattered by J.Car Press. It's my 4th collection, and it was published in 2019. First, I want to also thank you, Jim, for this opportunity and for the labor of love that Verse Virtual is, creating poetic community. I appreciate that a lot. I would say God Shattered offers poems on family, community, landscape, weather, fairy tales, daydreams, skepticism, silence, and hope. My mother raised us on Bible stories and fairy tales. My father traveled a lot and was absent a lot. And even though we moved a lot, we had grandparents' hometown. So I've got a lot of contradictory experiences. And I think you'll see some of these themes in the book. Excuse me, I've got allergy issues here. So recurring images in this collection are crows, mirrors, shadows, secrets, the desire to believe and to be believed in a world when it is hard to have faith. If God is shattered, pieces fly out and lodge in each of us and in all living things. So I think these poems explore the concept of godly in within us and without in our world. So I'm going to read a poem. It's a story from Genesis of Adam and Eve, and it's just called Eve. Adam is chosen to name the beasts, but it is Eve who soothes them, speaking the language of touch and release. How innocent they all are. Naturally, she is curious why this, not that. Which is the juiciest fruit? Only the serpent can match her wit. When their eyes lock, the hair on her nape prickles. If you eat of this tree, it whispers and slithers, you will be as gods. She senses the cold-blooded part of her stir, the strangeness of desire. She plucks the pear, shares it with her mate. Their bodies shudder in a new, wild way. In a flash, she sees she is part of the whole and yet set apart. The taste still sweet on her tongue. She hears herself say, beguiled. Banished, God replies. For eons after, she will be blamed, her daughters punished for the damage wrought by her sons in his name. Thank you.
Thank you. We're going to have to correspond, Debra, because I love writing on Old Testament themes. And I have in particular a couple of garden stories that I think you would love. And
Oh, good.
I'm really looking
Excellent.
forward to your book.
Thank you.
Jess Parker. I don't think I know you, Jess. So let's have a great introduction.
Oh, no pressure. Hi, I'm Jess Parker. I'm in Fitchburg, Wisconsin, which is just outside of Madison. And I work in strategy for my day job. Yep, I'm very close to Marilyn, close in proximity. During the day, I work in strategy. I have a 2.5-year-old who inspires a lot of my writing these days. But today I'm reading from Star Things, which is my first and only published collection from 2021, published by Dynamo Verlag. As the title would indicate, there's a lot of motifs of the stars, although the subject matter of the poems ranges quite a bit. And the book was written over the course of about 15 years. So it's followed me through a big chapter in my life. And I like to think of it as all of the poetry that was written before my son was born. And my second book is very much kind of after the journey of motherhood. So today I'm going to read the first poem of the collection, which is Saturn Rising. And it's one of my favorites. And I like to think of it as a little bit of a prologue for the book in a way. Saturn Rising. We had much to drink and more to climb. There was a moon rock and radish uphill. Sliced and wide open was the sky. We wanted to see the satellite, a teetering overgrown saucer twitching as if on its way to your tongue for a taste. A new datum, to be loved as intricately as Saturn's rings are particular up close, and held as tightly as they are together from afar. That night was our telescope. We scraped our knees, inching toward the lens, wiping the clouds clean, to witness tomorrow poke holes through sky, flicking light on a still blue pond. Or are they pebbles on the bottom, blinking up? Their reflection, a Morse code city, paging constellations with their off, on. Thank you. And I'll drop the link in the chat as well.
Great, thank you.
Go Badgers.
Yeah.
And amazingly, a neighbor to you, Marilyn Taylor, you're up.
Okay, yes, we are more or less neighbors, about 3-4 miles apart, and we read at a reading not too long ago, about 6 months ago. Was that right, Jess? Yeah, I think that's about when it was. I just quickly came to poetry sideways. I came to poetry through linguistics because I had already have always had a huge affection for the English language and its history and the etymology of words. And I took a course accidentally called Literary Stylistics. And I thought, this sounds maybe a little bit less than boring. So I took it and I was fascinated, and I learned how forms are put together in poetry and how they are used and altered and loosened up today, and they still bring a great deal to a poem. Of course, a lot of people, including me, are writing back in the strict forms. There's a poet I love whose name is Rina Espaillat. Do you know her work? Look her up. Espaillat. And she says, she's a formalist. She's won 1 million awards. She says, I like to dance in a box. And I think that's the reason behind my liking to write formal poems, best of all. Pardon me, it's the allergy thing too. I was going to read a completely different poem, but I'm gonna, because we were talking about being in our 70s, which I no longer am. Anyway, but a lot happens in that decade. And this poem, my first husband passed away at the age of 75. And I wrote this poem as a tribute to him. Incidentally, this is the name of the book is Outside the Frame. And it was published by Kelsey Books. And you can get it through Amazon, but I think I'll also put down another way to get it directly through me when I get back to the chat. Okay, this is called Poem for a 75th Birthday for Alan Marcus Taylor, 1923 to 2012. Love of my life, it's nearly evening, and here you still are, slow dancing in your garden, folding and unfolding like an enormous grasshopper in the waning sun. Somehow you've turned our rectangle of clammy clay into Southern California, where lilacs and morning glories mingle with larkspur, ladyfern, and zinnia, all of them a little drunk on thunder showers and the broth of newly fallen flowers. I can't get over how the brightest blooms seem to come reaching for your hand, weaving their way across the loom of your fingers, bending toward the trellis of your body. They sway on their skinny stems like a gang of supermodels, making fabulous displays of their dumb and utter gratitude, as if they knew they'd be birdseed if it weren't for you. And yet they haven't got the slightest clue about the future. They behave as if you'll be there for them always, as if you were the sun itself, brilliant enough to keep them in the pink or gold or green forever. Understandable, I decide, as I look at you out there, as I lean in your direction, absolutely satisfied that summer afternoon is all there is and night will never fall. Thank you, and thank you, Jim, for this opportunity.
Excellent, excellent, excellent.
Thank you. That poem rhymes, by the way.
I have to say here, when I started editing Verse Virtual, Marilyn would submit poems and I would read them and I go, this is really great. And then I would go back and read it again and realize that she had written a sonnet or that she was writing informal metrical poetry. And having done some of that myself, I know how difficult it is to write a formal metrical poem that absolutely does not call attention to the form, where the poem comes through and the form is almost incidental to it. That is a difficult thing to do, and I absolutely love reading your poetry, Marilyn.
Thank you so much, Jim. That's the goal, to have the content always take precedence over the form, but I think the form underscores the content.
And it does. It's good stuff. Paul Jones, you are up.
There he is. Hi, Paul.
You do have to unmute.
That would be better, wouldn't it? Okay, I'm glad to follow Marilyn because in my book there and in my publications, including in Verse Virtual, are sonnets, sestinas, villanelles, and others. And I mix them up to create other new forms as well. So it's been a lot of, I see the poetry as a communication back into time and joining forward and joining across culture. So I enjoy finding that of it. To that end, the form of this poem is a Facebook status from Betty. This is Betty's current status. I've got a boombox I bought in 1985. I only play 2 tapes, Beastie Boys and 9 to 5. I found it in the attic when I finally got divorced. It's the one reason I'm still alive. That and a cat named Beetlejuice, and a son in California who FaceTimes me twice a week, and a check from the bastard with whom I never speak. Not a check, really, but an e-transfer from his lawyer into my account from that no account. I quit buying razors. I quit buying Nair. Grow where the hell you like, I say to my body hair. Not that I don't care, but instead I found some value there, some beauty really. My reflection isn't their perfection anymore. I'm the one who can, after some adult pottery classes, turn mud into a plate, into a vase, into a magic mask. The mask is a way to see and be seen more clearly. The mask has one eye, a bit cockeyed, the nose a little off center with one nostril flared. Not like the photo I made for Match. That one was posed, lit up, touched up, softened up, made up, and smoothed out. That one got 200 messages in 36 hours. What took you so long, guys? One message I might have answered began, I too have seen tragedy. At our age, who hasn't? I almost read it. I felt a kinship there, but a distant one, like the shadow image of a family photo of a forgotten third cousin. I held the mask between me and the screen. He knows how to play the records, but honey, you know the grooves too well. You know the moves, said the mask. The mask ain't illin'. The mask knows the truth. Some places it's all taken and no given. Pass me the scalpel and I'll make the incision. I make my own decisions. I cut out the part of my brain that goes on suicide missions. I mean, Beetlejuice has his favorite box and I've got mine. I turn all the mirrors in the house around so they won't shine. Thank you.
I have a question for you, Paul.
Sure.
Where were you raised?
I've been in North Carolina all my life.
Okay.
So I'm from Chapel Hill. My mother's family, however, is from Tidewater, Virginia.
Okay. I ask because I hear a lot of Southern accent, but my mother was from Alabama, which is a different Southern accent than what you've got.
Correct. Yeah, mine is more Central Piedmont in North Carolina, but also Southeast Virginia. So I grew up with a boot and hoos.
And my other question is, who did the artwork for your cover?
So that's a great question. It is a 19th century illustration from the Biodiversity Library. It was a book to help Christian children of England understand the animals and the world of the British Empire.
That is fascinating.
It's
All right.
There's a great picture, and the bat is perfect. I owe Chase Dumac, who is the editor of As It Ought to Be. He accompanied that with the poem that's called Something Wonderful that's in the book, and it was just so perfect. It's also copyright free. It's been in the public domain, for 50 years or more. And part of my work when I wasn't doing poetry, besides being a college professor, was working in open information, open software. So this is all in this particular copy is in Wikimedia, and Wikimedia is a great resource for copyright-free images.
It is indeed. Thank you.
Thank you so much, and thank you for having us all here and having us meet each other.
Great.
Go Tar Heels.
Well, as we like to say, it'll be another year. Go Tar Heel women's soccer, who are the world champions.
All right. We are ready to hear from Joanne.
Okay, well, thanks a lot, Jim, for hosting these parties. I really enjoy hearing everybody's poems and also putting names and faces and voices together from Verse Ritual. I've been writing poetry since I was a little kid, but except for a few poems I published in teaching journals, I really didn't even try to publish until I retired. But over the last few years, I've gotten to study with poets that I love and be in critique groups and wrote a lot. And that all led to my first collection, To Drink from a Wider Bowl, which was published last April. So this January, I published a chapbook through Kelsey called On Shifting Shoals. And it's up there behind me, a picture that I took from where I live, which is over the past 10 years, my husband and I have lived in Curie Beach, North Carolina, which is right outside of Wilmington. And it's a small beach town. And most days I either walk on the beach or ride my bike around town. And that all led to this chapbook. So the dedication of On Shifting Shoals that I put in the book it's dedicated to everybody who never tires of the ocean. And if you're one of those people, I hope you'll enjoy a book of poems that kind of reflects with a poet's eye many different facets of life at the beach, some of which you get as a tourist and some of which you don't. There's so many aspects of living here that it was really hard for me to pick one poem that kind of typifies the book. There's some short humorous poems. There are poems dealing with the environmental crisis of sea animals, evacuating for the hurricanes, fighting against the mayor we had who wanted to let drilling happen off our coast. And some poems were inspired by encounters with both tourists and locals here, both positive and negative. And many grew from just gratitude for being so close to the natural world. So that I'm just so lucky to be immersed in. So finally, I chose the one that I wanted to read, which is entitled, A Father Teaches His Daughter to Ride the Waves. He carries her on his shoulders, her fingers clasping the boogie board he's taught her to steady over her head. He wades out past the first foam to where the blue deepens, where she'll feel the thrill of the challenge when she coasts back to shore. He carried her, cradling in his quivering arms, when she was still wet with vernix from the womb. Carried her when she cried, bewildered by her new world. Carried her in a backpack to the park, and the first time she saw the sea. Carried her with one arm, juggling groceries in the other. Carried the tunes she loved when he put her to bed. Carried her picture in his wallet and her dreams on his chest. Carried them in his breath as he slept. He carries all that still as he lifts her onto the board, gives a gentle push, and releases her to the waves. I've put the thank you. I've put the poem, the blurbs that fellow poets wrote about the book, as well as some sample poems on my website. And I am, and I will put my website in the chat. You can get the book on Amazon or directly from Kelsey, but you can also get it from me, and you can read a little bit more about it, as well as about To Drink from a Wider Bowl. So thanks very much.
Thank you. I especially like the repetition of carrying and the sense that it gave to the poem. Well
Thank you.
done. Okay. So now what happens is free for all. You can all unmute. We can talk, visit, enjoy for at least another 15 minutes because I planned for an hour for this. And if any of you need to drop out, that is okay. We will not think any the less of you. I have particularly enjoyed the format of these book parties as opposed to the poetry readings where we have featured poets or just an open mic where people get up and talk, because this feels more friendly to me. I get a chance to know more about you. And when I'm reading submissions, for me, it is just wonderful to recognize, oh, I saw that person at one of our book readings, and I have a much better sense of who you are as a person, which then makes the poem different for me. And I think I've remarked on other occasions, I tend to read books in their entirety. So when I sit down with a book of poetry, I may not read front to back, but I will read the entire book. And that is a much different experience than reading one or two or maybe three poems from someone that have been selected perhaps for a theme. And one of the most important things that I learned as a college student was from a professor of Shakespeare who himself was an incredibly educated, both in breadth and depth person. He said, you can tell from a person's writing whether they are sincere or not. And he had the ability to spot manipulative writing miles away. And he absolutely hated manipulation and loved being able to read things that just rang true because they were written from the heart. And that's what I find in most of the things that are submitted to Verse Virtual, is that what I am reading is real. It's not manipulative. It's not meant to jerk on someone's heartstrings or make them feel a certain way. The writing is real and the emotions that come from it are real. So I enjoy that piece of what I do.
You touched on something, Jim, that at the beginning when you were talking about, how people read books, and I was kind of wondering what people thought, because, I think we all obsess a bit about how to set up the book, what should be first and what to put in it and how to organize it. And yet I've found that most people don't read the book from the beginning to the end. They kind of open a poetry book and they read something, and all this that went into the whole trajectory of it seems to get
Joanne, I have to interrupt just to tell you an anecdote I heard about William Stafford, who was asked that question about how to order your manuscript. And he said, stand at the top of the stairs, throw all the pages down the stairs and pick them up in the right order.
I was wondering if people thought about it,
I used a slightly different guide, in part because mine's a miscellany, but A.E. Stallings, Alicia Stallings' book, is I was reading through it, I noticed something pretty interesting about it, and I copied exactly what she did. I sorted the titles in alphabetical order. And the beauty to that, if you're not doing something of a narrative sweep or a memoir or something, is you can find the poems and as yourself, if you can remember the title. And people reading the book, as Joanne said, tend to dip in and out. And if it looks And I'll have to say, it was not as good as 2 shots of whiskey for getting rid of the anxiety effect, but it works pretty well.
That's great. I
Interesting.
like that.
Recognize this, Joanne?
Yes, I guess it came for the library, huh?
That's on the top of my, that's actually out on my desk. I'm still reading from this.
Great, thank
Yeah,
you.
So things have
I-
really changed with people who are composing on computers. It's a lot different to organize your poems for a collection, because you can have a couple of files open, but like go back to Leminski, he would print everything out and you have a piece of paper, and he would just spread everything out in the room
Yeah.
and just make stacks of paper and move this one over here and this one over here and they made change all on little pieces of paper. And when you get to the computer age, you don't really have that.
No.
It's
Well,
like the whole.
you can do something, because if you work in Word, you can actually set your Word to, let's say, 8 pages at the time, and you can overlook your arrangement, and you find the one that doesn't fit. You actually get a feeling for.
8 is one thing, but imagine 80 or
Yeah, I know, but the trouble is, how many trees do you want to kill? No, if you print
So
it all out.
you probably
on
read at
napkins.
least print out 1 copy. So what one of my friends in Greensboro did working on her book is she rigged a clothesline and hung them there and moved them back and forth.
Oh, yes. Yes, I remember
I
that.
like that. I like
That's
that.
great.
I like
The
that.
idea for a drawing. I like that.
Yeah, I like that a lot. That's
You know,
cool.
poet hanging all his or her poems across
That
the
would be
cross.
a
I love
great
that.
book
Yeah.
cover too.
Yeah.
Yeah, the cover could be a shot of that.
That's right.
They might look like the Mexican lace pieces or Tibetan prayer flags or something. You
That's
do them up
true.
from-
I guess, I might be unusual then. I just like the way I listen to a record album. I read a poetry book through because I think that the poet intended a certain, I know Paul, but I think most probably do intend and carefully decide how they want one poem to follow another. And I want to respect the intelligence of the poet that did that. I think especially with poetry that has a very strong voice, and there is a kind of narrative, I just get pulled in. I just get pulled in, and I love that. So that's how I read a book.
I agree,
I
Debra.
agree.
I do
Yeah.
the same. Yeah.
You do.
I like to read front to back because
Jim,
I do respect that, and I very carefully choose, especially the first and the last poems in the book. Just like when I give a presentation,
Yes.
I'm also a performer. So my intro and my exit, I want you to really remember those. And then within both of my chapbooks have sections. Within each section, I think about the arc, if there's a story to go with that section, but it's not as important within the section as it is the overall ordering of the poem, and having a movement from things that are humorous and things that are fun and things that are classical, to just not have the reader be hung up in one thing. And since several of my poems in each book deal with grief, I try not to make it too hard on the reader. I want to give the reader some relief from sharing my grief, and allow him or her to relax a little with a different poem as well. So I agree. I'm a front to back reader, especially if I'm reviewing it, because I really don't want to miss the author's voice. Sometimes if it's just something I have around and it's been sitting there, I'll pick it up and read a poem or two out of it, like I do the magazine, Verse Virtual every month. But it's really more of a thing of really wanting to get close to that author, as close as I can. So
How do you find the book titles?
Well,
Isn't that agony?
yes, mine on this last one came from from the poem, the title poem. But I have to tell you, it was harder for me, especially with the editor that I had, the first chapbook I did has a photograph of mine on it, but this editor did not want to use a photograph of mine. First of all, I also had problem with what I wanted to have. And finally, I went out and I liked multicolored covers. I went and I spread out. My little emoji in our family is a scarf, because I have a collection of scarves that I buy, and I wear them too. I'm very Italian. I can't get see, I have a turtleneck on today. I don't want a draft on my neck. I'm sure it's going to make me sick, and it does. But so I took a picture of one of my scarves, and when I go to a reading in public now, I wear that scarf to see if people recognize that the cover is that scarf. But the titles, I mean, I find myself copying down phrases that I hear that I really like, and then I see if I've written poems to fit that. And the title poem thing is not really something I'm really that comfortable with, but it worked for this collection. But the whole idea of a poem, I just wanted to, I want the reader to hold the idea that's the whole book. So the first one is actually better because it's languid lusciousness with lemon. And there's a lot of food poems in it, but also just about the family and the love of family and the sweet and the tart, the whole, back and forth of that. But I think each book is different too.
Yes.
Some are easier to name.
Oh, yeah.
And Jim, your
Yes.
book, your new book, it's so beautifully titled, and the image on it as well that you chose to go with it. I know that's one of your photographs, and
Yeah.
it's a perfect combination, I thought.
Thank you. I'm going to do a quick screen share of the proposed cover of my to be published.
Oh, interesting.
That was taken at the Great Salt Lake, and I have absolutely no idea what the relationship of those two people is,
Mhm.
but it spoke so many different things to me. It's like I'm turning my back on you, I'm walking away. It's like, oh my gosh, I need to catch up with her. Just so many things. But the title of the book is Goodbye Sounds Like. And there are so many ways to say goodbye, both pleasant and un, that it just seemed like a great way to pull a collection together.
Wow, yes.
But Jim, this photo is brilliant. But if these people are alive and kicking and they see your book somewhere, they might complain that they have been published without their consent.
They might complain all they like, but they were in a public place where there is no expectation of privacy. So
I don't know. I don't know exactly how this works, but the photo is brilliant.
The photo is wonderful.
In the US, if you are in public, there is no expectation of privacy. And I do not need
Well
their
said.
consent.
Also, there's not a personality detection in it. So there's a couple of other tests besides the expectation, but you're fine.
Oh, good.
It's different in different countries. Yeah.
Yeah. Jim, let me ask you something about your friend who could spot false emotion in poems. What if indeed the poet intended not to be considered as the speaker? There's a fine line there if you're writing a persona poem. Exactly. I want to hear your reaction to that, because it often works. We know it's not the poet, but sometimes that's a fine line.
It isn't so much what is being said, but how it's being said. If you are an intensely honest person, you can write fiction and it will still come through that you are an honest person. And that was his take on it, is that the language and the construction of the language itself, and you would appreciate that being a linguist, is that you cannot write fake stuff and it not be noticeable.
I know what you mean. I get the hair rising in my neck when I read it. What I object to particularly is what they call, I think, word poems, where basically the whole thing just doesn't make any sense at all, where people grab
Language poetry.
language poems. They just drive me nuts because they feel so artificial, so built up out of nothing. And they make no sense. They give me no feelings. They elicit no response. They're just there. Look at me. It's a big ego trip. I just can't get into them.
I'm with you 100%. I think a poem should address the reader above all else.
Definitely.
But I need to just weigh in on this too. I feel that I have to be very careful. A poem may not speak to me. And in my poetry critique groups, I tread carefully because what doesn't make meaning for me apparently finds relevance and resonance with so many others who are reading it. So it's hard for me. I can only judge my own reaction, and whether it's fake or not, it's difficult for me to tell, but I can tell when it elicits an honest, authentic reaction from me. I cannot tell, I can't even foresee how others will react to it. And that is the beauty of being in a group. They may point out something that I completely overlooked or couldn't get into until I heard their point of view. I'm flexible, but I know I have a first reaction and then I have a delayed reaction. And that's how I view poetry.
Oh, it's got to be personal. Absolutely. It's every time you read a poem, or a book, you're in a love affair. It's that moment of romance. And this is why it's, I think, so difficult sometimes to watch the film of the book. Because if you write a book or a poem, whatever you write, and you're lucky you have 20,000 different visions of what you've written with each reader. And then one guy makes the film, and suddenly you're into just one person's vision of what you read with your imagination, and you have a secondary moment of creation the moment you read something. Even when you see the film, you have a secondary moment of creation. It's a very interesting subject.
It is.
Another reaction that I find interesting is if I don't spell out every single thing with clarity, the kind of clarity some readers want, I'm usually questioned like, well, what did you mean by that? And so forth. And there are things that I don't want to explain. I want to leave that up to the reader. So one response that I've learned from an author or two is to say, what if I weren't among you as you were reading this? I weren't there to explain. You picked up my book and read it without me there. How would you react to it then? And what would it make you think of? And that's my response. I don't want to explain everything.
Absolutely.
And I leave it that way.
Absolutely. I totally agree with you.
It's poetry. It's not supposed to be 100% understandable. Part of the joy of poetry
is a good thing.
Is the mystery of language. Is just the texture of the words, or the feeling or whatever. And sometimes people are perplexed and they're expressing perplexity. I mean,
I read poetry with my belly. I mean, half of it. Not with my brain, but with other senses.
But the words have to speak for themselves. You will not always be around as the poet to explain what you meant, and nor should you. So it's something I'm still grappling with. That's all.
Yeah, poetry can be abstract. You have abstract painting. What's that? What is that? Well,
thank you. That's a great analogy. Great analogy. Thank you.
So you can say this.
I'm going to stop recording at this point, but we're not going to stop visiting because I love the conversation.